Well, good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to this online panel discussion of Iran at War, Leadership Transition, Deterrence, Erosion, and Regional Strategy. My name is Kristian Ulrichsen. I'm a senior non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum, and it's great to have you with us. It's now day 10 of a conflict that already has shown rapid signs of escalating far beyond perhaps what some of its initiators appeared to believe. It's already caused enormous economic and, of course, human damage across Iran and many neighboring states. And with us, we have three excellent panelists to help unpack what it means for Iran and for the region. We have, first of all, Dr. Hamidreza Azizi, a visiting fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, SWP, and an associate researcher at Klingendale, the Netherlands Institute of International Relations. And he's also a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and does an excellent roundup every evening on X of daily developments, which I urge you all to look at. Dr. Sanam Vakil is the director of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House and a James Anderson professorial lectureship in Middle East Studies at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, SACE Europe, in Bologna, Italy, where she has taught Middle East politics since 2008. And Alex Vatanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. He specializes in Middle East and regional security affairs with a particular focus on Iran. He was formerly a senior analyst at Jane's Information Group in London. Alex is also a senior fellow in Middle East Studies at the US Air Force Special Operations School and teaches as an adjunct professor at DISAS at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The way we're going to do this panel is that I will ask each speaker 2 rounds of questions, and then we will have questions for a Q&A from audience members as well. So I'd like to begin with Hamidreza. How would the selection of Mujtaba Khamenei as the third supreme leader in post-1979 Iran affect the stability of the political system and the country's domestic and foreign policy direction?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's been, of course, a very tough few days for all Iran watchers, and I think it's the toughest question to answer at this moment. The direction of the country, and we still even don't know how long Mujtaba is going to remain in his place, given the Israeli and also to some extent American threats that he would be targeted. But what we know so far, and what I can say is that, of course, he's been quite, ambiguous person. He's not been that much into politics in public terms. But I think as important as this person being selected as the new supreme leader is also the timing of it. I mean, how quickly the system moved to close ranks after the assassination of Ali Khamenei also tells a lot about the current state of affairs. So I would say in wartime conditions, the Islamic Republic's top priority has been to demonstrate continuity of authority and prevent any perception of power vacuum. So in that sense, the rapid appointment of Mujtaba, I think, suggests that the regime's core institutions, in this case, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and the political security elite around the office of the Supreme Leader, and also at the level of Supreme National Security Council, those who have been actually in charge in the past 10 days, they have been able to at least show that they can make a consensus on a candidate very quickly. So in terms of wartime conditions, I think that kind of accelerated the process itself, and also the nomination of someone like Khamenei who would who would represent basically continuity within the system. On that, we can say that Mushtaba's elevation to the supreme leadership somehow reflects wartime consolidation of the existing power structure rather than political transition or transformation, things that we all had been speculating about for quite a long time. For years, Mushtaba had operated within the inner circle of the leadership system, and particularly in security and political coordination roles within his father's office. We know that he has had close ties, for example, with IRGC intelligence and a lot of networks, center of which being the office of Ali Khamenei. And his influence over parts of the Revolutionary Guard and also parts of the clerical and security networks around the leadership office. These things actually made him one of the few figures who would be seen as capable of commanding immediate loyalty or securing immediate loyalty in the midst of this national security crisis. So, in that sense, the succession appears somehow designed to preserve the institutional ecosystem which was built under Ali Khamenei and by him, rather than to open a new political phase or, as I said, kind of transformation of the system. But of course, one can imagine, and there are already signs that it's not going to be without challenges. The supreme leadership of Mushtaba. One of the main arguments that was almost always made against his supreme leadership would be that it would mean hereditary rule in the Islamic Republic, which would represent the political system before the 1979 revolution, and also would be rejected within the Shia jurisprudence. And then we had even some rumors in the past few days that Khamenei himself had advised clearly against his son becoming the supreme leader. We don't know to what extent it is correct, but what we can say is that the system needed to show this continuity in order to keep its core support base at a time when we're just 2 months away from it's just 2 months past from the internal unrest and the widespread public protests and the massacre of the people, which kind of represented an irreparable gap somehow between the state and the majority of the society. So what remains for the state is that minority hardcore supporters who are very much ideologically oriented and for whom the name Khamenei carries a lot of significance. So this is a wartime contingency, but it's also, as I said, an attempt at showing unity at this moment. So I would stop here, and then I'd be happy to elaborate further if needed.
Thank you very much. Question for you, Sanam. Following Iran's attacks on GCC states, the Gulf states, and Azerbaijan, and I think today a missile was intercepted in Turkey as well, how might Tehran recalibrate its regional strategy and relations with neighboring countries?
Thank you, Kristian, and thank you to the Gulf International Forum. It's a pleasure to be with you and to think through some of these difficult questions that we're all trying to make sense of since the war began 10 days ago only. I think we have to sort of take a step back and contextualize Iran's response and the unprecedented strikes that have been felt by Iran's neighbors, to just focus for a second on the existential nature of the war underway for Iran. While the United States has perhaps tried to moderate expectation since February 28th that regime change will be necessarily achieved, the US has made clear that it is looking to really eliminate Iran's nuclear program, completely degrade Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, and prevent Iran from recapitalizing and responding in a meaningful way. So for Tehran, this war underway is very much about changing the nature of the regime, and obviously, as Hamidreza has laid out, also, targeted and decapitated senior figures, including Ali Khamenei. And so, since the war has such a broad and scope and objectives, Iran has also calibrated its response because of, again, the existential nature. And I would just say that Iran began preparing for this war the day the last war, the 12-day war, ended last year. Why? Because I think it was very clear for Iran that President Trump, came into that war, targeted Iran's nuclear facilities, and then stepped back. But there was no real meaningful off-ramp, no meaningful way back to the negotiating table. And from last fall, Iran also saw that that war was, maybe a first course in what we are seeing play out today. So they prepared an operational strategy to protect itself, and because Iran doesn't have the conventional military capabilities to even stand up to the United States and Israel in a serious or meaningful way, Iran has gone to a strategy of effectively challenging American partners in the region, striking across the Gulf, and spreading the costs of this war, not just to the Gulf states, or not just targeting American military infrastructure and bases and embassies and facilities in the region, but also with the aim of spreading the pain and the cost of this war far beyond that of the Islamic Republic's leadership or the Iranian people. And here, of course, as you rightly mentioned, Azerbaijan has been targeted. There have been reports of at least two efforts were made towards Turkey that were supposedly brought down by NATO. And, this strategy is about raising the stakes of this war and buying Iran perhaps the time and the space to play a bit of a longer military game against these two stronger parties. I think what is obviously problematic about this strategy is that it completely leads to a boomerang effect for the Islamic Republic specifically. There is no way that Iran can emerge from this war maintaining normal diplomatic ties with its neighbors. And it's worthwhile just reminding everybody that over the past number of years now, Iran had improved its relations, normalized its relations, if you will, with a lot of its neighboring states in the Gulf. And that normalization effort was ticking along, not necessarily resolving by any means years of mistrust and differences, but leading to sort of more direct diplomacy. And the Gulf states themselves collectively and individually had lobbied the United States against this war, for example. So, this, of course, will bring to an end this effort at using diplomacy and engaging with the Gulf more specifically. And then, of course, if you think about the broader arena for Iran, Turkey, too, had been a player in trying to support diplomatic efforts. But here again, Iran is trying to widen the aperture and bring as many countries in. So the pain is held more broadly. The challenge will be for Iran, and I'll stop here, is when this war comes to an end. Because when this war comes to an end, whatever is left of the Islamic Republic or whatever form of governance does come to hold, Iran will be isolated, and Iran will be back to its condition of strategic loneliness, and it'll be very hard for Iran to survive on its own if it's militarily weakened and economically also very exposed.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, certainly when I was in the Gulf on several trips at the end of last year in October and December, almost everyone I spoke to thought that the 12-day war was at most a cessation of hostilities temporarily, and that the conflict was going to ramp up and it's an even greater level at some point in the near future. Alex, turning to you and to defense capabilities, how resilient are Iran's military and defense institutions under sustained pressure and targeting by the United States and by Israel?
Kristian, thank you for that. It's good to be with you and with Hamidreza and Sanam. Look, we're 10 days into this war. They have ballistic missiles left. They have short, medium range missiles. They have drones, which I understand are more successful than we might have anticipated. I would say what they're doing right now militarily is exactly what they telegraphed for a very long time they would do. So I don't understand if anybody's surprised that they're hitting the Gulf states. I don't think the Gulf countries are surprised. I think the Gulf countries knew exactly that this could happen, and they've been begging the United States not to go to war with Iran along these lines. And their voices were not heard, and therefore they are upset, and in many ways rightfully so. They're upset because they will continue to pay the price, because Iran, even if they run out of ballistic missiles that reach Israel, they can still reach much of the infrastructure in their neighborhood to the south. I think they will try and be meticulous, if that's a word I can use, to be strategic, perhaps another word to use, to sort of target what they think would be bringing about maximum economic pain, not just for the Gulf states, but also for the international community at large. I think just before we came on, I was looking at the interview by Kamal Kharazi, used to be, probably still is going to be a senior foreign policy advisor to the Supreme Leader's office, saying the only way we're going to win this is to maximize economic pain on the other side, meaning the United States primarily, Israel less so. But so I think that's basically how I would understand their military capabilities, primarily aimed at, well, obviously one is to hit back. We've seen that in the last 10 days, for example, that our very unfortunate attack on the Iranian desalination plant quickly resulted in an Iranian response of kind, a desalination plant in Bahrain, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So you can expect that sort of thing to happen, to continue to happen. But overall, maybe if more Iranian civil infrastructure is hit, particularly refineries, energy infrastructure, what I suspect they will do in the first instance is to target U.S. companies, Western assets, assets that are linked to Western interests. Again, all of this is aimed to put pressure on Donald Trump and on Western powers, because the Iranian message is very clear. It's impossible not to hear it. If we're going to go down, we're going to bring as much down with us as we can. And again, if you're sitting in the Gulf countries, that's not a pretty place for you to be in. And no wonder they are worried about where this is going. I mean, overall, I would also maybe looking at this differently, and this sort of ties into what, you asked Hamidreza about in terms of Mojtaba Khamenei. I actually said that just in the previous panel I was on at the Middle East Institute, just I came here, I said, Mojtaba Khamenei was groomed by the Revolutionary Guards. He is not someone who's got political capacity, at least in the short term, to do much independent thinking if he decided to go in a certain way. So Revolutionary Guards are running Iran. The political armed part of the regime is running Iran, and they're not just in charge of the ballistic missiles and drones, they're in charge of choosing supreme leaders, because I don't think Mojtaba Khamenei would have been supreme leader without the IRGC. That gives you a sense that when we're talking about the military, trying to distinguish the Iranian military defense doctrine, separate that from the Islamic Republic, this country, well, that's a mistake, because they are the same. They are essentially, as of today, the same. Now, that could change depending on these assassination campaigns and, a lot of more of these Iranian commanders being killed. That might tip the balance in favor of the so-called technocrats inside the Iranian regime. But we're not there yet, and I don't know if we will get there, but that obviously depends on the duration of this war. Last point I make, Kristian, then I'll pass it back to you, is this. As I said earlier, we shouldn't be surprised that Iran would attack the Gulf countries exactly as they said they would, and they did. Equally, we shouldn't be surprised about another basic reality. The Iranian regime, above all the Revolutionary Guards, consider this a two-front war. One is against U.S. and Israel and their interest in the region. and unfortunately, the Gulf countries are now in it. They're because of the American bases and because of proximity and ease for Iran to get to them, and because that's the easiest way to create an international economic shock, as we're seeing with the price of oil going over $100. But the other part of this fight is at home, what the Iranians have been calling the so-called hybrid warfare that they see being staged. This was kind of, in their own wicked way, if you will, they saw the mass crackdown on the protesters back in January as part of the same hybrid warfare. It started with the 12-day war. Then they saw the hybrid warfare show itself based on their, I think, totally mistaken, but that's their reading. The protesters in January were said to be instigated, incited by the United States and Israel. So what did they do? They killed them en masse, tens of thousands of people. So when we talk about defense capabilities, don't lose sight of the fact that the bulk of the Iranian defense is in the Artesh, in many ways, in terms of ground troops. Whatever it is, 350,000. You put their Navy, you put their Air Force on, you just north of 400,000, separate from the IRGC's 150, 170,000. But what the Artesh might be tasked to do, and this, I raise this because this is unknown, uncharted territory for the regime. Revolutionary Guards are in charge of the drones, the missiles, all that. That's to be expected. They've done this all along. No surprises there. What could be a surprise is you got, based on what happens with the economy, so far we haven't seen popular mobilization. If that changes, people come back in the streets again the way they did in January, who's going to crack down? Who's going to maintain law and order at home? You don't, again, the Revolutionary Guards are on the run or engaged with external threat. So much and they're very scared, obviously they should be, in terms of coming out because they're targets. So that leaves the home front, the domestic situation, perhaps in the hands of an entity called the Artesh, the regular armed forces, which has never been asked since 1979 to do this. And that's a big question. Will they shoot at their fellow Iranian citizens in this moment of war? Untested. But because you asked me a defense question, I just wanted to throw it out there. From the perspective of the regime, this is a two-front war. One is against the outside. The other one is potential Iranian citizens who want change, and how the regime needs to use its defensive or security apparatus to maintain order at home. But let me stop there, Kristian.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to turn back to you, Hamidreza. How are decision-making dynamics within the Islamic Republic evolving after the loss of several senior military and political figures?
As Alex said, and I agree with him completely, it's the IRGC in the broad sense, which is running the show. So the assassination of Ali Khamenei and, of course, with him also several senior officials, security and military officials, as it appears, fundamentally changed how decision-making works inside the Islamic Republic, at least in the short term, again, as Alex mentioned. So under Ali Khamenei, the system operated with a high degree of centralized authority. It was never a one-man show. This was a mistake that was sometimes made, but in any case, major strategic decisions, especially on matters like nuclear policy, negotiations, war and peace, and even regional operations, the so-called axis of resistance and so on, would ultimately go through the Supreme Leader's office. So in that sense, personalized role. After his death, that model temporarily shifted, as we saw, towards some sort of collective crisis management. So operationally speaking, and that's more of a military matter, there was always this, at least since early 2000, the Mosaic Doctrine and the autonomy that was assigned to provincial headquarters of the IRGC, of course, with certain instructions, how, when, and which targets to shoot at. But in terms of strategic decision-making, the Constitution of the Islamic Republic provides for an interim leadership arrangement, and that's what actually happened. So for until yesterday, of course, until Mustafa was announced as the new Supreme Leader, we had this interim leadership consisting of the President, the Chief Justice, and the cleric from the Guardian Council. But in wartime conditions, as we are now, the most important shift has likely been, as again it was mentioned, been the rise of the military security apparatus, and on that, not just the IRGC, but the what I call the security core of the system, which includes the Supreme National Security Council as well. So, in terms of people, if you want to speak, we had two guys very much in charge. Ali Larijani, the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, and then also Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, also a former Guard commander and the current Speaker of the Parliament. So we can say that strategic decisions regarding missile strikes, regional escalation, and for example, when and if it's going to be okay to go for some sort of de-escalation, these all rest with these security people, and we shouldn't forget that. At least according to the reports by the Iranian media, Mojtaba Khamenei seems to be injured in the attack. So it's not clear even when he's going to be actually capable of leading the country in one way or another. So this means that at least in the early phase of his leadership, decision making will probably remain more kind of networked and coalition based and security based around the Supreme Leader's office, what's left of it, the Revolutionary Guard, the Supreme National Security Council. So in that sense, the system is, at least at this moment, as we were speaking, transitioning somehow from a more personalized leadership style or leadership model, as I described earlier, to a more security-driven wartime governance structure. The durability of this structure will depend on two factors, I think. Whether Mojtaba can consolidate authority within the clerical establishment, and again, assuming that he's going to remain there for some time. So this is first. And second, whether the security elite continues to view him as the most effective figure for maintaining regime cohesion after the war as well. So this is what I can tell at the moment about the kind of transformation within the decision-making system of the Islamic Republic.
Great, thank you. Sanam, what strategic options does Iran currently have between escalation and diplomacy with the United States, and how might Tehran weigh these choices in the days ahead? I think you might be muted.
Sorry. You think after all of these years. So I don't think anyone is unfortunately talking about diplomacy because really all sides are all in on trying to achieve as much as they can. And as I mentioned earlier, Tehran is really prepared for a longer war. And at the same time, of course, the US and Israel have sort of indicated that there's maybe shifting timelines on the horizon. Certainly, we woke up today to, increasing oil prices above $100 a barrel. The economic costs of this war are certainly farther and wider. And so, if there are diplomatic off ramps, maybe I can try to hypothesize what they might be. But I personally struggle to see this ending at a negotiating table unless there's a huge marshaling of effort, not just from the region, and that looks unlikely, but more broadly beyond the region, to create a sort of Madrid-like conference. And again, I find that hard to imagine right now because everybody's all in, and the United States' objectives are really targeted to destabilizing Iran for a longer period of time. So, we're in the escalation cycle for now. I think this war has about at least 2 more weeks in it. The U.S. still has much to accomplish beyond targeting the ballistic and defense infrastructure. The nuclear program, as I understand it, has yet to be targeted further. And certainly, as was mentioned by Hamidreza and Alex, I mean, what remains of the leadership establishment in Iran from Mojtaba and beyond is still, not guaranteed. I imagine there will be further efforts at decapitating members of the regime. But on the Iranian side, I think that they've prepared for this longer war scenario. They're sort of messaging themselves that they're in for the long haul, whether that's 1 month or many months. I mean, that's the sort of mentality that they are bringing to this conflict. And their response in these 10 days has gone through phases. There is certainly, this is seen to be an attritional war on the one hand. And Iran is racing the clock, trying to protect its own capabilities while trying to perhaps deplete interceptors on the other side. But there's a ways to go in escalating. We have towards over the weekend seen infrastructure being targeted, from desalination plants to other energy facilities on the Gulf side, and oil depots as well in Iran. So, that sort of foreshadows that the infrastructure space is a point of escalation on the horizon. And, secondly, I would say that the Straits of Hormuz have yet to be formally closed by the Iranians themselves. Perhaps the U.S. is, going to more formally target Iran's naval capacities. We saw the sort of shock and awe sinking of that ship in international waters, but there will be more efforts on the naval side as well. But the Straits still remain out there. And I would say that's another layer on the escalation ladder. And then more broadly, of course, you've seen mobilization from Hezbollah, and Israel, of course, is entering that conflict in a devastating way. And Iraqi militias are moving and mobilizing, but simultaneous to that, there are efforts to degrade their capabilities. I mean, the big player that has not yet entered into this war are the Houthis. And so I think they're another realm on that ladder to watch. Perhaps there is some, the rumors of mediation or channeling between Iran and the Saudis, and that is why the Houthis are there as a hedge to prevent Saudi from entering the war, escalating further. But there's more for all sides to do. And again, what's problematic, there are plenty of mediators that would like this conflict to come to an end, including Turkey, including Egypt, including Pakistan, including even countries in Europe and in Asia. But it's hard to see that mediation off-ramp develop. And even if a ceasefire is obtained, that's not a good enough outcome for what remains of the Islamic Republic. They need something durable. They need some sort of credible assurance that another war isn't going to come, or further strikes won't come over their vulnerable skies in the future.
Great, thank you. And before we turn to the audience, one more question for you, Alex. To what extent could internal unrest or separatist movements in Iran's peripheral regions pose a challenge to the country's unity and cohesion, especially in a prolonged crisis?
Kristian, I would first start off by saying that Iran, as a multi-ethnic society, has groups within it, particularly the minority Sunnis, and particularly the Kurds and the Baluch, have genuine grievances against the central government in Tehran. That was also the case during the days of the Shah. So I don't think anybody can take that away from them. There are genuine grievances in terms of basic human rights. For example, the desire to be taught in their mother tongue. And the central government in Tehran, and again, going back before 79, has failed to address these concerns in a meaningful way. They've played with it on the margins. You would suddenly have, I don't know, Hassan Rouhani's so-called pragmatic administration that would put in place a Sunni as governor in Kurdistan or Balochistan as a token, well, not just token, but as a gesture, but it wasn't enough. So my point is the grievances are real. Now, are these grievances going to be weaponized by the United States and Israel in this current fight against the Islamic Republic? Is that a good thing for Iran, for the Iranian ethnic minorities, or for the region? And that's where I'm far less convinced. And in fact, I don't think it's a good idea. And we've seen that already. The United States is kind of shelving the idea of using the ethnic Kurds. Couple of reasons. The most the Kurds could have done with a few thousands of troops they have is to carve out a part of territory in Kurdish populated regions in Iran's west. That's the most they could have done. They weren't going to march into Tehran. And in even getting territories in Iranian Kurdistan, they would have had presumably heavy losses. Even with the United States and Israel providing air corridors and so on, we have to remember the regime has been preparing for this, and there would have been a lot of casualties. And I'm not sure if the Iranian ethnic Kurds, who, by the way, are also up until recently not exactly on the same page in terms of what they want out of this conflict, if they could stay united. So my bottom line on this is this. And by the way, I should also point out that if you, in the case of the Kurds in particular, you are helping Iran regionalize it as well, because as we know, the Turks are not going to sit there and watch this. Iranian Kurds being supported by the United States and Israel is something that the Turks would do everything they can to prevent. And some reports suggest that was one of the reasons President Trump walked away from using the ethnic card, at least for now. Iranians, by and large, need to get together around a common set of goals that, it's irrespective whether you're a Kurd, a Sunni, a Christian, a Jew, or whatever you are, but it's about basic human dignity. And I think if they do that, you just muster so much more energy, and then you can go after the Islamic Republic and present your case to them. My good colleague on this panel, Sanam, and I, we wrote a piece for Foreign Affairs just about a month ago about Iran's divided opposition. That's how I think in the short term, they're better off. Kurds, Baloch, all sorts of other minorities go about it together because they're stronger together. Otherwise, they're going to be played essentially. And that is not good for the Kurdish cause. And the Kurds know this far better than anyone like myself. The Kurds have been played by foreign powers repeatedly over history, and they know exactly what that means. Now, they might have calculated, well, they can play the Americans and the Israelis too for their own benefits. And clearly, it seems to me that they've decided that it wasn't worth their time. But the idea of Iran collapsing as a state without opposition having done the thinking, the planning, making sure that your pursuit of political rights and an agenda doesn't come at the expense of not necessarily the fall of Iran, which I think the vast majority of Iranians are against. But even if you're for it, you don't want it in the state of civil war. You want it done orderly fashion. Even if you want a federalist Iran the day this regime goes, then there's a way to do it more peacefully than taking chances and maybe inviting violence within the country among the various communities. So I would just say, we have to keep in mind the long history of separatism in Iran. We have to be very conscious of the fact that if we get this right, we meaning the outside world, that it's going to play into the narrative of the regime, that these foreign powers attacking and these Kurds sitting in Iraq, they don't mean well for Iran. They want to dismantle Iran. They don't care about the unity of the place or the prosperity of the place. And that's exactly their narrative you have to confront and challenge and remind the Islamic Republic that the people like the ethnic Kurds who are angry, they're angry because for decades their rights have been trampled upon. So anyway, let me stop there, Kristian.
No, thank you very much. We have just over 15 minutes now for Q&A, and there's a question from a member of the audience. I think any one of you can take it, so however many of you want to take the questions. About the choice of Mujtaba Khamenei as the third supreme leader, what are the possible reactions from the US and Israel, and also from President Trump, given his comments last week about wanting to be part of the process? Anyone?
I'd go very quick. I would just say I don't know why President Trump is so keen on the optics of this being one of Iranians declaring openly that they're surrendering, because that makes life very difficult for someone like Mojtaba Khamenei. If you're more realistically trying to get to see if this new son, this new supreme leader, the son of the previous one, is different than his father, then you can have back channel diplomacy, if you will, quietly sending messages in and out, and to see if he's willing to change course. Because look, his father was extremely stubborn. Ali Khamenei is many ways the chief reason why we are where we are in terms of this war, because he was not listening to people inside the country who were warning him, you're in the wrong track. And he wasn't listening to Trump when he said, look, bad things will happen unless you talk to me. So Ali Khamenei is gone. Is Mujtaba Khamenei of a different personal disposition? He's in a different world compared to what his father ever experienced. And he's 56 years old. He could be supreme leader if he wants to be for 30 years, if this system survives. But he has to make some tough choices and go in a different direction. Because I think doubling down and just basically showing the middle finger to Donald Trump is not the smartest thing you want to do right now. But again, Trump could make life easier for the other side. Instead of seeking public humiliation on your knees and beg for mercy, which seems to be what he's asking for, he could sort of look for ways to give him the way out without necessarily, depriving them, if you will, of their dignity, which oftentimes is the word you hear a lot from the other side, that there's an element of dignity involved here. But let me also say one thing, Kristian. I want to quickly point to something Foreign Minister Uruchsen said. He was talking about to U.S. Media, permanent peace. So no more rounds of conflict 6 months down the road. You know what permanent peace needs? A permanent, different way for the Iranian Islamic Republic to look at the issue of the United States and Israel. Because that's the only realistic thing you have to do to be able to get the other guys to actually take you seriously when you say you've changed course. And so when they were asking for permanent peace, the United States need to push and say, show it to us and we'll show you our credentials.
Right. Anyone else?
May I add one point?
Yeah.
So I want to say actually that what President Trump said, that Mujtaba Khamenei would be unacceptable to the United States, that actually played very well into the hands of those who were supporting Mujtaba to make a case that he actually has to be the supreme leader, because I'm afraid that at the middle of a war that is having global consequences, the President of the United States doesn't have a clear idea how decision-making within the Islamic Republic works, especially when it comes to this idea of anti-imperialism, anti-Americanism. So this is very important, because we know as a fact that the supreme leadership was kind of contested, and even until a couple hours before the name of Mujtaba Khamenei was announced, there were signs that some people within the system are not happy with that. Hassan Rouhani, the former president, whose name was also mentioned as a potential successor, came out publicly urging the Assembly of Experts to consider the timing, as he said, and not to basically undermine the unity of the country, knowing that, of course, this person is going to be contested. But one more point, maybe just quickly, and this is something that today a colleague said in another call, and I think that's a very valid point, that we are now dealing with a guy who's in charge of this system, who just lost his father, his mother, his daughter, and his wife. So he has a lot of personal incentives also to be as stubborn, if no more, not more than his father. So here comes the question: how much he himself is going to be in charge versus those networks of security and IRGC linked people. I think that tells a lot about whether and to what extent there's going to be any room for compromise.
Great, thank you. We have a question about Iran's relations with China and Russia, and especially in terms of political backing, economic support, and military cooperation. How might the current crisis reshape some of those?
Happy to start and take a stab quickly. I mean, there's endless sort of questions about Iran, Russia, and China. I think at this point should really be debunked. The relationships are not sort of NATO-like alliances. There's no expectation that China and Russia will wade in and provide that sort of material support that Iran needs in these moments. But, of course, we have seen in open source information that the Russians have perhaps been helping Iran in targeting American pinpoint targets across the Gulf. And I think that is really striking and worthwhile letting that sit and digest. I don't think we've developed that out enough at any means, but the Russians certainly have lots to gain and lots to lose in this war. Right now, of course, the bump in oil prices is a win. Right now, the bump in allowing oil sales to go to India is a win. And this sort of global distraction away from the Ukraine war, I think, certainly helps President Putin. I mean, very obviously. But, the weakening of the Islamic Republic after we've seen the sort of downfall of the Assad regime ultimately, doesn't bode well for Russia. But Russia is constantly hedging in the Middle East and equally wouldn't want to compromise or overplay its hand with the Gulf states simultaneously. So we'll have to see how this plays out. I think the bigger question is for China going forward. Trump is still moving ahead with his trip to China at the end of March. And I think, it will be interesting to see if the Chinese wade in as potential mediators, if you will, in this conflict. Not because the Chinese in any way are looking to save the Islamic Republic. I think they have been long frustrated by the destabilizing capacity of the Islamic Republic. But China still has been an important economic lifeline for Iran. And again, there's behind the scenes military and cooperation as well going on. But I think for a broader perspective for China, be worthwhile considering how China is seeing the past 2, if not 3 years of conflict in the Middle East, where their economic interests have been damaged significantly, and they have long been free riders on the American sort of security order of the Middle East. And I think perhaps there might be questions going around in Beijing and in sort of policy military circles as to whether relying on the United States as a security guarantor is working for China. What that means or how China might shift, it's perhaps too early, but I think this could play out differently for China, and we could see China force project over a longer period of time.
Can I very quickly add to that, Kristian? Is that okay? Very quickly, one specific issue to watch out for example, if this war continues and US wants to sort of deprive the Iranian state from money to be able to operate, one thing to watch out for with all these additional naval assets, for example, would they stop Iranian oil tankers taking oil to going to China? That's a direct sort of obviously a challenge to the Chinese, and we'll have to wait and see how the Chinese deal with that. But the broader point, Sanam was talking about China potentially as a mediator. That could well be the case, but here's another way of looking at it, that China is very much the target here, that what the United States is doing is to get China and Russia out of Iran, turn Iran into a pro-American entity for good, for decades to come. So Chinese, if they read it that way, they certainly don't have much of a appetite to mediate, because what's in it for them? And anyway, what I'm saying, by the way, is not me sort of speculating. This is what some close advisors to President Trump are out there saying publicly, that Russia and China will be weaker as a result of US wins in this war in Iran.
And indeed, we've seen that with Venezuela as well over the past 2 months too. We were mentioned, I think Alex mentioned the Houthis earlier as the entity that so far hasn't necessarily entered the fray. We've obviously seen the Houthis come under Israeli attack in August, the attack which killed 9 members of their technocratic cabinet and further attacks in, I think, October, which eliminated senior military figures. So they have maybe got internal challenges. We've seen, obviously, Hezbollah in Lebanon face a lot of attacks over the past week as well. How do you assess Iran's or Tehran's abilities to arm and mobilize its allied groups in Iraq or in Yemen or Lebanon? Or has the pressure on these networks really limited Iran's ability to escalate through its proxy groups?
If I may,
Yeah.
look, regarding the Houthis, what I can see coming out of Iran in the strategic narrative is that they are prepared, they are put on high alert, and the only reason that they haven't been involved in this so far is that they are kind of supposed to work as some sort of a deterrent against direct intervention or direct involvement, better to say, of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So this is first. And second, it is in line somehow with the patterns of Iran's own attacks on Israel and the Houthis' much more, of course, limited capacity in terms of long-range ballistic missiles towards Israel, because that's for sure that the reduced tempo of Iranian missile strikes on Israel has to do with the launchers, especially being hit during Israeli and American airstrikes. But on the other hand, it has to do with the deliberate choice of first trying to take out the early warning system, radar systems of the United States around the region. And there was a list actually published by Iranian sources yesterday, 16 of them, like different models and different types of intercepting systems being targeted. At least 3-4 of them are, kind of confirmed cases. So given that, I think we should expect more serious involvement by the Houthis as well in terms of firing missiles toward Israel once they can make sure that they are actually going to have an effect. And finally, I mean, to see it in a kind of a broader picture or big picture of Iran's relationship with the so-called axis of resistance, I can say that already after the 12-day war, they started. I mean, there was a process of reckoning within the Islamic Republic strategic circles that this network that we built and worked a lot to help us, it didn't actually work in a way that was supposed to. So the expectation was not that high to begin with. But in this wave of attack, I think, I mean, in the current war, it was seen and perceived as existential by groups like Hezbollah and the Shia groups, by basically the Shia actors in the region. It is perceived as existential as it is by Iran itself, and that's one of the reasons why they are also involved. So it's both Iran pushing them and also them feeling this existential threat. But of course, material capacity, material capabilities is something that you cannot ignore, and that's the degraded state of the axis of resistance.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but we have had several people ask about the possible change of the security architecture in the region and on regional order after the war. Can any or all of you address some of these issues?
I'll make one quick comment. I'll be very curious to see what happens to Abraham Accords after this, because you could make the argument if you sit in the Gulf states today that depending on how angry they are once this fighting ends, because there's a lot of anger that they feel that we're not protected, and I know U.S. feels that been protecting them, but that's not their perception, and perceptions matter. So if they sort of draw the lesson that the whole investing in the United States militarily in terms of opening up their territory for bases and so on, just turn them into a target as opposed to actually being protecting them. If that becomes fundamentally the debate, that is going to suggest perhaps that overall they're going to focus more on kind of, if the Islamic Republic survives, look for ways to coexist, if you will, with the Islamic Republic, as opposed to let the Israelis and Americans shape the agenda in terms of what happens to Iran in the region. And if things go south, these Gulf countries become frontline states, which is exactly what they've always feared and sought to avoid.
I'll just wade in very quickly, Kristian, to say that the architecture is already shifting and has been since October 7th. We've seen alignments and movements persistently over the past 3 years, and we've seen stronger Turkish Gulf relations develop. Obviously, we've seen Pakistan sign a defense agreement with Saudi Arabia, and there are suggestions that Turkey could join in. I think the bigger questions, Alex laid them out, I think, quite directly. But for the region, they have to find a way to, I think, assert more unified collective defense against two big regional threats that have been abundantly made clear over the past 3 years. Certainly, Iran is the very obvious and persistent one. Israel is the new one for the Gulf, and they don't want to have to pick sides. But I do think that they are going to continue to diversify and strengthen and bolster their defense capabilities, including from Israel, but also from a broader aperture. What I hope above all for the Gulf states is that through this crisis, they will have learned that they do have to integrate more economically as well as militarily, and learn to transactionally cooperate to insulate themselves from these sort of crises that were not of their own making, but imposed upon them.
Great, thank you. Hamidreza, do you have anything to add, or do you?
No, nothing on my side.
Okay, and finally, before we wrap up, do any of you or all of you have any final concluding remarks?
I'm good, thanks.
Yep.
No,
Great.
we're all
Well,
tired.
thank you all very much. Thank you, Hamidreza, Sanam, and Alex, for the insight you provided. It's been extremely useful. I hope the audience has found it useful as well. Thank you to the audience for the questions, and of course to the Gulf International Forum for putting together this very timely panel. So good afternoon.
Thank you.